I was just going to show a couple of these photographs here from Apollo 15. This is the Apollo 15 craft, just as you see it mounted here after it's recovered.
Okay.
And a close-up picture of it. And there it is in the water. And just look at the surface area on here that you're looking at. And there it is in splashdown. There it is in recovery. And now this is a little different. Now the foil tape is now coming off all over the vehicle here. Here it is there. You can see it falling apart all over the craft. You don't see that in the other pictures. There it is there. All the tape falling off all over the place. And there it is all over the place. How many different vehicles do you think they were using to shoot these photographs?
Well, it'd be quite a few because there's a few changes there.
And then this one says non-flight only.
Non-flight only, yeah. Okay, well, that hasn't been anywhere then, has it?
Like that's the model. But when you see all this tape here falling off all over it, and then there, just huge amounts gone. In that shot, you can see it kind of falling off there. In that one, it's off in this one, all over the side where they're coming out. And then we get to this one where they're recovering it on board the ship. There's no tape falling off anywhere. No, it's even a different color.
And also one other point to make on the command module, look at the aluminium handles just to the right.
Yeah, they're intact.
They're everywhere. Intact. And if you look at it even on the descent, when it's coming down on the parachutes, you can still see the aluminium handles.
Yeah.
Now, aluminium melts at about 600 centigrade. Why aren't they melted? We're told it's 3,000 degrees, the plasma outside.
Yes.
But they're all still intact. There are 4 of them actually on the craft. Why are they still intact?
Here they are here.
Yeah, there they are. Aluminium handles, just screwed onto the side of the craft. Makes no sense. Unless it was dropped out of an aircraft, of course, then it would be much simpler.
But this vehicle's different than the other vehicles. Completely. Yes. Absolutely different. Gotta wonder if they were taking pictures from other practice runs.
Well, it may have been a practice run because look at them all walking quietly out of the helicopter. And if you've seen the Russian craft landing in the Soyuz capsule, they have to be carried out of the craft. These guys are just walking as if they've been on a little stroll in the afternoon.
And if you look closely at their hands, they claim they had abrasions from wearing the gloves.
Yeah.
These guys don't have anything. He's got his wedding ring on and his own watch.
And he hasn't got 8 days of beard on his, and his stubble on his...
No, they came right out of the makeup studio for this shot. Not a mark on their suits. They were inside a craft that was covered with dust and moon rocks that they dragged in. Even if they jumped into these suits, just climbing in and out of there, they would have been marred up. These were nice fresh suits that they put on to get out of the aircraft with.
It's just yet another unexplained detail that we've identified, had a look at, asked questions about, and got no answers.
Yeah, didn't look like he got any abrasions wearing a helmet either, did he?
No. He's got about 1 or 2 days stubble on him, but that's about it.
Look at those hands, not a mark on them.
Not a mark on them, and they're told that their gloves were painful to wear because they rubbed, because they're so stiff.
They had raw, swollen hands from doing that. But going back to this craft here, how can you have this craft shot there? There's 3 shots of it. And then this craft. It's black and white, but it is a different color because the aluminum foil is falling off of it here all over the place. Completely different craft.
But it certainly hasn't been exposed to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit temperature.
Well, this doesn't have any heat scorching on it, this one at all. It's just that foil tape that they put over the top of this thing to make it look like a vehicle.
Well, it wouldn't if it was dropped out of an aircraft, would it?
It wouldn't. And here these guys, wedding ring on. Coming back with a wedding ring on? I doubt it. You're not going to be wearing a wedding ring dealing with those type of circumstances that they were in. They wouldn't have that. Be nice that that they would wear them, but not on a mission like this. You wouldn't want that to interfere with putting your gloves on and off.
You wouldn't. But you've got to keep the story alive.
See, their hands are fine. Not a mark anywhere. Wonder if he's even wearing an Omega watch. It's 10 after 4 there whenever they took this shot. Somebody can look that up and see if that's when the recovery time was.
That ring looks rather like the one that Aldrin was wearing, the Masonic ring.
Yes, they all had them.
Well, there's no harm in being a Mason.
See, nothing there. Don't see any mark on his hand anywhere on the knuckles. They should have been, even just when they were practicing in the suits. You don't even have to go anywhere. Just put those suits on and walk around and they should be all marked up.
Of course they should.
Anyway, I just thought I'd bring that up. I was looking at this anomaly of there's chains and everything else in there. It's just an unreal pile of garbage in there. You can zoom in anywhere on this.
Yeah.
Anywhere on this. I mean, you got, little thing. That's a cord there plugged into something, and that's the shadow of it, right? It looks like an old radio of some kind. You've got these really nice rocks. I've never seen any rocks that have these kind of items running around them. There's a chain down here. Yeah, it's laying right across there. You can see the chain. It runs up and across this way, down over there, goes on down to here. Just anomalies, unbelievable in here, right? It is a junkyard. It truly is a junkyard.
Where E.T. dumps his previous model.
Look at this stuff. I mean, you can see the bolt holes through there. You can see the bolt running through there. Beautiful round. Like, where do you get this stuff from?
Does look pretty odd, that.
There's other ones over here where there's pieces of equipment. This is connected up here. It almost looks like a TNT charge or something like that laying on the ground. Perfectly round, eh? You can just scoot through all of this and just see, look at this stuff wiggling around, snaking around all over the place. I've never seen rocks like that in my life.
No, it's the dump yard at Cinder Lake.
Look at this piece of wire sticking up and wrapped around. Just comes right up and around. Beautiful cone shape here, whatever that is, with a stripe on it. Just nature's finest. Like I said, I was just horsing around looking at stuff. I was looking for the next Buzz Aldrin and next wet flag.
Oh, talking of Buzz Aldrin, there's a new film coming out. It's called Apollo 13 Survival. It's on Netflix from next week. And it's a story of the kids who were involved. There's some of the kids watching the launch of Apollo 13. That will be April the 11th, 1970. And they've obviously grown up a bit, and they've now made a film about them. And there's a picture there. I don't know if you can see that. This is watching the return of Apollo 13. And there's Buzz Aldrin, and in the background, Neil Armstrong looking a bit bored by the whole thing, and Jim Lovell down there. And there's the Apollo 13 command module, which is now in Kansas Cosmodrome, we're told. But there's another one at Grand Rapids Museum, which doesn't look anything like it. This is Apollo 13 Survival, due out next week on Netflix. There's a big article about it here in the Telegraph. What does it say there? Mum never allowed us to think Dad wouldn't make it back to Earth. That's Jim Lovell. Ahead of the new film, the children of Apollo 13 Commander Jim Lovell recalled the trauma of his final mission. Oh dear.
Did it ever talk about what happened to in Apollo 13 on what happened to the descent stage?
No.
Like the LEM itself?
No, they don't mention that.
Because one article I read, and it's years ago, when they released it, it fell into the Atlantic Ocean, somewhere off the coast of Africa, I think. And they were concerned that the RTG would start releasing, like their little nuclear generator that they have on the craft, the RTG, to power up the equipment. And of course, they were saying in the article that it would be safe for at least 1,000 years until, like, the casing on it, that it wouldn't break apart even on reentry or whatever.
Yeah, that's what they say.
And it's like a couple of miles down or something like that. Well, why, if they're going to recover stuff, if you got guys like Bezos, who's able to go out and 3.5 miles down, recover an engine, they obviously tracked the re-entry of the LEM itself into Earth's orbit. When you look at it, it has no heat shields on it or anything else. It should have just completely evaporated. Should have turned to plasma coming in. It included the RTG, which would have given a radioactive signal when it was burning up.
Oh, well, they couldn't allow that to happen because people might get upset about it.
No, so they came up with a nice story that it's nicely a couple of miles down in the ocean somewhere.
Yeah, nice story, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't seen anything about it lately. I'm quite sure our viewers would probably look it up and make comments about it, because there's probably 4 or 5 additional PDF files out there on it. Like, they update them all the time.
It's interesting. We're talking about the re-entry of the command module. That's the Apollo 13 command module re-entered. And it looks very similar to the Apollo 15 one you were just showing. And it's also got the aluminium handles on it. This is on Apollo 13. Well, it didn't go anywhere, did it? So it wouldn't burn the aluminium handles off.
Well, if anything was going to burn up, it would have been it, because look at the difficulty in their guidance system on reentry. They'd be probably, if it ever happened, it would have been the highest temperatures recorded.
Yeah, it was going very fast. Extraordinary stories they make up, and they expect us to believe it.
Well, the problem is they don't even have heat shields to withstand that temperature yet. They keep failing.
Yeah, that's why they keep postponing Artemis and its return, because they can't ensure the safe return of the astronauts. They don't know if the capsule will get back through the atmosphere without burning up.
I think they're using that as a grand story to keep interest in space and Apollo missions and, Mars missions, the next lunar attempt or whatever. They just want to have all of that there, saying, look, it's not easy, that we're having these difficulties. They're probably off in a studio somewhere filming the thing. I was sent a whole bunch of stuff on Chinese fakery on the ISS and stuff like that, doing a experiment. I showed Robert. It's quite wild because they put a so-called a plastic or a sponge ball in some water and they push it down and it stays down in the water because they're in zero gravity, so it doesn't float. But the water itself is sitting in the glass, has a level surface, and it's on the bottom. It doesn't float out. If you're in zero gravity, the water should float out of the container. No, it's there. They push it down, and then the guy showed they use a little straw, and they push it down, and all of the air comes out of the straw, out of the sponge, and it comes down, and then it shows some stuff floating around in the water that floats to the surface while the ball stays down there. But the water itself is sitting in the glass on the table. They're doing magic tricks for kids is what they're doing.
Yeah, that's it. Magic tricks. Shows are good. I'm also reading up more about the SR-71. This is written by one of the people who were instructors with the program. SR-71 Delivered, The Inside Story by Richard Graham, SR-71 Pilot, Squadron Commander, and 7th Strategic Reconnaissance Wing Commander. Interesting book, because one of the things they do when they train, they're shown what effect flying at 80,000 feet has. Now, 80,000 feet is about 15 miles, i.e. not very far up relative to space. And they have a little glass with water in it, and they're in their acclimatization chamber, and they reduce the pressure to what it would be at 80,000 feet. Guess what? The glass of water boils.
Exactly, because it'll boil at 70,000.
Yeah.
That's where water starts to boil, at 70,000 feet.
And they make the point that above 26,000 feet, which is lower than the summit of Everest, if you're exposed for any length of time without additional oxygen, you will die. That's why it's called the death zone above 26,000 feet. Now, 26,000 feet is only 5 miles up, not very high. That's why they wear pressure suits in the SR-71. So if the pressure is too low, because they're inside a pressurized cabin, but if that pressure gets released for whatever reason, they can instantly pressurize their suit to ensure they don't get their blood boiling. So what happens in space?
Well, there again, you're in an aircraft, and within a few minutes, you could be at that much lower level. Your body is not acclimatized to it at all. Even if they had a differential of 10 or 12,000 feet with the loss of pressure inside the craft, they're going to become confused. They could be throwing up in their helmets. They could be doing anything else. They have to have that pressure. You can't do it in that short of a profile. That's why when you're climbing Everest and stuff like that, they stop and their body becomes acclimatized to it.
Yeah, it does.
But when we go to Apollo, they went from sea level, because they're at Cape Kennedy, they're right at sea level, to 5 psi within a couple of minutes.
No acclimatization.
They didn't practice that. They weren't put into chambers. They weren't given any kind of testing. You can't find any documentation on testing to see if these individuals could handle that much of a differential in that short of a period. And not only that, they're maintaining it. And if you read any other articles on people that go up to high altitudes even like tourists and stuff like that. They're okay, even if you go to Lake Titicaca or whatever. It's 12,500 feet. And they're spending a few hours getting up there, not just a few minutes, but they're only up there for a few hours and then they come back down. Now, depending on where you are as a tourist, if you're coming from sea level, you're definitely going to have the effect. If you lived in Colorado all your life and you're already at 5,000 feet, you could probably do the difference. But those are real effects of just the atmospheric pressure differentials that the body has to have. And you will not find in the Apollo missions dealing with that, because basically they're going from sea level to 35,000 feet within 2 minutes.
Makes no sense.
And maintain that. Their body can't handle that. Nobody's body can handle that.
That's why I find examining the SR-71 and the problems that had and how they were overcome is a very interesting parallel with Apollo, because they were both being developed at the same time. The early to mid 1960s was when the SR-71 was being developed. All right, in secret, it was flying out of Groom Lake, aka Area 51. That's where it flew its first test missions, or first test flights out of Groom Lake. It was secret, but Apollo wasn't secret. And now we're finding out why it wasn't secret, because they didn't know what the hell they were doing. And nobody else did either, so we couldn't question it. Now, 55 years later, nearly 60 years later, we can begin to question it. And that's why I think comparing the technical aspects of the SR-71, the Blackbird, is a very good exercise. I'm also looking into the X-15 flights, at the edge of space, the X-15 flight program. That was prior to the SR-71. Again, very interesting stories. Milton Thompson, forward by Neil A. Armstrong. Heard of him?
Yeah, you can imagine the shape of those planes in the 60s. If they're flying around, they would have inspired a few UFO sightings, wouldn't they?
Oh, they could well have done.
You never see a plane or anything of that shape. And there they are. I don't care where they were secured in Area 51. They're flying all over the place. And people are looking up in the sky going, there's a UFO up there, because it's unidentified.
It is unidentified because nobody had acknowledged it at that point.
Nobody knew any aircraft like that in that design existed.
Interesting stuff when you start looking into different aspects of a similar program.
Yeah, it is. It is quite interesting. And the funny thing is we seem to have hit the ceiling at that particular. We accelerated to a certain ability as far as aircraft flight and everything else. We haven't exceeded that yet.
Yeah, the SR-71 still holds the record for flying across America from Los Angeles to New York. 64 minutes it took, just over 2,400 miles. And that plane that got that record is now in the Air and Space Museum in Washington. That's why it flew there. That plane was extraordinary. It has height records, fly to 80,000 feet and come back and land, flying at Mach 3, 2,100 miles per hour.
Yeah, see, then they tried to take that technology and put it into a commercial air flight, right, in the Concorde.
Concorde was that started in late 1960s. Concorde, spelled with an E. The French version of the word Concorde spells with an E. That's why it has an E on the end. That was flying at Mach 2, about 1,300 miles an hour. Looking into parallel technologies between Apollo, the SR-71, Concorde, the X-15. It's very interesting looking at how advanced some of those aircraft technologies were relative to Apollo. It's almost as if they weren't using what was available, because the Apollo command module was built of aluminium. Why was the SR-71 built of titanium? Because titanium is light as aluminium and can withstand far higher temperature variations, but they didn't use titanium, they used aluminium.
Well, titanium is a little more brittle.
Yeah, it is brittle. Didn't seem to affect the SR-71 very much.
It certainly wouldn't be able to take the G-forces that some of the other planes were using if you make it more brittle, right?
Yeah, up to a point.
What is interesting is we seem to hit in the 60s and 70s, we seem to hit a maximum amount of technology as far as flight goes. We haven't come much forward like we have much larger aircraft, more capable aircraft. The fuel efficiency is up there. The handling of the aircraft itself, the technology that's gone into that, and the guidance systems and all of that stuff is certainly there. But height-wise, speed-wise, everything else, nothing has really changed. They really maxed out in the late 50s and 60s. They really maxed out what a plane was capable of flying. And they did that without computers.
Yeah, slide
The
rules.
things were hand designed and built. And if you realize people like Neil Armstrong and that had to get in and fly the things,
Yeah.
they had no idea if they could fly. And then when they did fly them and found out that they flew well, it's like, find out where the limits are on the plane. They didn't have a computer simulated to say, hey, the wings are, you pull out of a dive at this G-force, the wings are going to snap right off. No, they went out and they actually did it. They measured the G-force until the wings snapped off, and then these guys hit the ejection seat. They probably popped out on those ejection seats. It was just like every other day at work, right, for them. We haven't come forward. We don't have materials. We don't have fuels. We don't have engine designs, anything that supersede what was happening then. We've refined them, but we haven't hit the next level. And that's the same thing with rocket technology. Liquid fuel isn't going to get us anywhere. It's too heavy. It has its own weight penalty that is so restrictive to get us anywhere as far as traveling in space. People don't understand that. Not to mention how dangerous it is to have it on board. Well, Musk demonstrates that with his unexpected rapid disassembly of equipment.
Yeah, he hasn't put any people on it yet, has he?
No.
I think it would be interesting if we went over that document that showed that it was possible sabotage of Apollo 1. It's interesting on page 8 because it's redacted quite a bit. This is on page 8. It says 5 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, urgent, 1/29/1967 memo to Director and New York, Washington, via Washington, encoded from Cincinnati 290840. And this is regarding the Apollo rocket fire, Cape Kennedy, Florida, January 27th, 1967, possible sabotage. It says, redacted, Student University of Dayton, Ohio, telephone number area code redacted, advised he made a collect call to parents, redacted, Scarsdale, New York, telephone number area code redacted, about 4 p.m. January 28th last. Call interrupted by conversation between two men. This conversation completely cut off, redacted, connection, and very clear. Neither identified selves. One man did the talking in well-spoken, authoritative manner. Redacted only definitely recalls two words, Apollo and Pentagon. Gist of conversation that great detail of evidence has been gathered indicating that Apollo rocket fire was not an accident but an act of enemy sabotage. Redacted, not sure of Pentagon, but impressed that call was from or to Pentagon or relating to discussion at Pentagon. No accents or other indications, location of men. No further definite recollection by redacted. Conversation lasted 1 minute or less, and when concluded, redacted were contacted again. No telephone operators involved. Night telephone repairman advises no way to trace but is electronic mishap. Information being furnished New York and Bureau of any acted deemed necessary by Bureau. No further action by Cincinnati. That's a teletype. Let's go on to page 13. This is interesting because in the first paragraph it says, to Director from Cleveland, unsub, information regarding death of 3 astronauts Apollo spacecraft at Cape Kennedy, Florida, January 27, 67, sabotage. Redacted security officer, NASA Cleveland, Ohio, telephoned advised this office at 4:30 p.m. instant date that a telephone call was received at NASA Cleveland just prior to calling this office from one redacted who stated he redacted Ohio telephone. Basically, it's the same as what we read before. But This is interesting. It says, reported that approximately 1 month ago, unlikely came into his redacted, and while there was mentioned he worked for a company that constructs and supplies NASA with parts for the space capsule, and that 3 astronauts would be killed in a fire. Further, advised he would furnish above information to NASA, Washington, D.C., this date. unable to be identified from Cleveland, indicates no further action being taken by Cleveland UACB.
And if you notice that on this document, the people that have read it have stamped the date that they've read it on and signed it.
And it is an FBI document because their stamp is right up at the top of that page, and it's initialed.
Yeah, and page 14, it has all of the people that it was sent to.
Yep, it
On the
does.
top right-hand side.
Mr. Sullivan ticked off.
Yeah, well, he'd received his copy.
Of course, this does rather tie in with what Scott Grissom, who's a 747 airline pilot, so he knows about these sort of things. He was able to examine the actual capsule. He got access to it, and he made the comment that he considered it was sabotage.
What gets me is Cleveland, Ohio keeps popping up all over the time.
What's the connection you read there?
Well, they're talking about Cleveland, Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah, it was the special agent in charge was from Cleveland and telephonically instructed to blank. But yeah, so again, Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah, but what office was in Cleveland, Ohio for NASA?
It could have been from the director of the FBI, but this is interesting because it says to Saks, Cincinnati, New York, Tampa, from director of FBI, Apollo rocket fire, Cape Kennedy, Florida, possible sabotage. It says to Cincinnati.
See, and then here another one, somebody else said that he worked at a factory in Columbus, Ohio, which were parts for the space capsule. So there was stuff there. But why would this information be going back to these people in particular that they knew in advance that something was going to happen? This is where the space capsule was being built, and the parts for the space capsule was being there. So they knew the technical aspect of that machine and whether it would catch fire or not. And they might have also designed it to catch fire because they're the manufacturer. They're putting this thing together.
You see, it's interesting here that on page 10, the last paragraph, it speaks of enemy sabotage. But then at the very end of it, it says, the substance of the conversation overheard by redacted has absolutely no basis in fact. If it had no basis, then why are they going to all this trouble to subpoena telephone operators? And this is just strange.
Well, somebody had an idea that it was quite intentional, and they were trying to put together the information about that. If this thing was designed into the thing, they knew it was going to catch fire. And the guys that built it would know how to make it catch fire. And they'd also know how to keep that door shut for 20 minutes as well. 20 minutes to open the door is absolutely ridiculous. And the other thing is why was it up on top of the first stage of a rocket that it wasn't designed for? What was it doing parked up on top of it? It was on top of an old Gemini SB-1 engine design, 200-foot main stage on there. It was not an Apollo first stage that it was sitting up on, and it doesn't belong on either.
Now you get to page 14, and it says a little bit something different. It says here at the top there, now the redacted has been changed to informant, but it says informant Shreve, Ohio, white male, 23, a high school graduate employed blank blank, Worcester, Ohio, stated unsub appeared at blank blank, Ohio, where blank employed part-time about 2.5 to 3 months ago. The redacted stated he, redacted Ohio, redacted, all engaged in conversation. Unsub claimed to be looking for Indian chief's grave by extrasensory perception. Stated that Unsub, in course of conversation, stated he worked at a factory in Columbus, Ohio, again Columbus, Ohio, which manufactures parts for the space capsule. It says, Unsub, by using divining rods in presence of redacted, stated that he had determined that 3 astronauts would die in future in end page 1.
Carries on the next page.
He's saying this guy could predict the future and he's using divining rods.
Determined that President Johnson could be assassinated in the future.
I've seen people use divining rods to find water and get water. But I've never seen him predict the future, whether a president would be assassinated.
Just interesting that this one student who actually did have some credibility, because he was the one who telephoned, and he did it before it happened. The telephone company representative advised no way to determine identity of the call overheard. Now, this is on page 19. Now, what it says here is that call interrupted and redacted heard crosstalk between two men concerning Apollo and the Pentagon. The gist of the conversation was that evidence had been gathered that Apollo fire was not an accident but active enemy sabotage. This redacted was of impression that the call was to or from the Pentagon. This conversation lasted 1 minute or less, after which redacted conversation with his parents was resumed. The telephone company representative advised no way to determine identity of the call overheard. So that's interesting. Interesting.